If you wanted to be one of the first people to own an Apple Macintosh computer back in 1984, it would have cost you around $2,500, which is the equivalent of about $7,300 today.
Wow, that's quite a bit today. I'm not sure too many people would be jumping at a computer for $7,300 nowadays.
Around the same time, one of those newfangled cell phones could run you as much as $10,000 in today's money.
Wow, that's even crazier. Though I think cell phones in today's dollars are getting into the thousands or low thousands, we're still not close to 10K yet.
Not to mention the service fees, which might be hundreds a month. In the 1970s, a Sony Walkman cost about $200. That's $700 today. A microwave, around $2,500. A 21-inch color TV might cost you the 2024 equivalent of about $3,000. And a VCR, around $5,000.
In an era when so many necessities seem unaffordable, it's nice to remember that at least some things cost less than they used to. And what you get for your money today is much more powerful and efficient, though also often more disposable.
However, these savings may have come with a hidden cost. A theory developed in the mid-20th century suggested an economic link between the cheapness of goods like electronics and appliances and rising costs in other industries like healthcare and education.
Today, it's known as Baum.
That is interesting. I haven't heard of this theory before, so it's curious that they're bringing this up. Obviously, those prices did change, so I'm interested to hear how they are connected.
Cost disease, or the slightly less grim Baumol's effect, and it was originally discovered by studying starving artists.
Being a stage actor, a concert musician, or a dancer has never been considered a lucrative career choice. But in the 1960s, two economists named William J. Baumol and William G. Bowen were surprised how hard it was to make a living in the performing arts, and they wanted to know why.
The organizations that typically employ these artists, like theaters, orchestras, and dance companies, tend to be non-profit, which puts them in a uniquely difficult financial situation. Unlike for-profit companies that seek to maximize revenue while minimizing costs, non-profit arts organizations strive to provide the highest quality service possible to the widest audience. But even more significantly, they are considered to be a sector of the economy that is stagnant in productivity. What does that mean?
Over the last century, the twin forces of technology and globalization have remade the American economy. Innovations in engineering and manufacturing, coupled with cheap foreign labor and streamlined supply chains, have drastically reduced the cost and time of production in many industries. It just takes fewer workers to make things than it used to, which in economic terms is called a rise in worker productivity. This allows companies to lower the prices of their products and increase the wages of their remaining workers.
But as Baumol and Bowen pointed out, some sectors of the economy simply can't become more productive. The output per man-hour of the violinist playing a Schubert quartet in a standard concert hall is relatively fixed, and it is fairly difficult to reduce the number of actors necessary for a performance of Henry IV Part 2.
As we've said many times before, the whole economy is interconnected, and what happens in one sector can affect another. Assuming that people are able to freely change jobs, the performing arts sector will have to compete for workers with technologically progressive sectors. Sure, musicians, actors, and dancers get psychological benefits that may induce them to accept less pay, but they also have to make rent, which is steadily increasing thanks to the wage gains in more productive sectors. Eventually, something has to give, like, say, two theater majors leaving the stage for a career in finance.
Nonprofit theaters can either raise their ticket prices, which could drive away their already small audiences, or compromise the quality of their work by only hiring performers who are able to work for scraps, perhaps due to inexperience or generational wealth. This may be why a 2019 study found that the wealthier your family is, the more likely you are to pursue a creative career.
If you're not personally interested in the performing arts, this all may not seem relevant to you. But over the last 50 years, economists have realized that the implications of Baumol's effect go way beyond the stage.
Turns out there are a lot of industries that experience slow productivity growth. There's a hard limit to how many patients one nurse can care for, how many students one teacher can teach, and how many streets one police officer can patrol. Sure, there are technological innovations that may streamline their work, but as Baumol noted, these innovations would have to be persistent and progressive to keep up with sectors like tech and manufacturing.
I personally wouldn't want to live in a world without theater and music, but I couldn't live in a world without healthcare and education. Neither could you. So these industries have had to increase wages for workers who aren't getting any more productive, which means these services get steadily more expensive, proportional to the production savings that we see in goods like computers and TV.
That is an interesting idea, which is that effectively one segment of the working population has particular limitations on their productivity, basically, here. And so you have to disproportionately increase their salaries to keep up with the demands of other sectors that do increase in productivity over time. And so I haven't heard this argument before. It's interesting. I'm not sure if I'm fully swayed towards this, because also they haven't technically shown these people actually making more salaries. So I think an example that immediately comes to mind is they keep referencing healthcare and education as an example. And we all probably agree in America that healthcare and education is getting way more expensive. However, I'm not sure how well people are getting paid there. Like, I think education as an example, teachers are notoriously underpaid. Like, I think that's constantly on the news. They strike here in America. They fight for a fair pay and a fair wage at particular times. And so it's not clear to me whether they're noticeably appreciating their salaries above inflation in that sector. And same thing for healthcare, which is, I know doctors obviously make a lot of money, potentially some of the most money as an individual employee could. But I'm not sure if the doctors are actually the ones who are getting all of the money from the increase in healthcare. Like, there's probably overhead for insurance companies and administrators or whoever owns the hospitals, things like that. So that would be something that would be nice if they cover it. I'm not sure if they will, but that is a lingering question in my mind that would have sort of put a bow on top of this argument, would be, what are the actual employees getting over time compared to what they historically were able to get, and that these costs aren't just like getting absorbed by a bunch of middlemen in a bunch of these sectors or other greedy individuals who aren't necessarily the teachers or the people like the nurses and the doctors who are helping people in these segments.
Now, this isn't the only reason for rising costs, but there is evidence of Baumol's effect all around us. When a teenager can make $20 an hour pushing buttons on an espresso machine, you're going to have to pay at least that much to get them to babysit your kids. Probably a lot more, since it's a much harder job. When tech companies are offering six-figure starting salaries, is it any surprise that so many bright young people who might have pursued medicine or law are majoring in computer science instead? Baumol's effect tends to hit local governments especially hard because they employ so many low productivity but high importance workers and can't just close up shop if the numbers don't add up.
This problem may seem intractable, but not everyone thinks so. Some argue that every industry has the potential for productivity gains, we just haven't developed the technology yet, but we might be close.
With the help of artificial intelligence, perhaps one teacher could simultaneously manage a dozen classrooms. Patient-facing chatbots could
These are silly animations that they have for these things. But I do agree with the premise. Obviously, doctors are more productive, I would assume, today than they were 100 years ago. And maybe that productivity isn't necessarily in them treating more patients, but I would certainly assume that a physician today has more options available and there's more things that they're considering as potential ailments for a patient, and that they have a variety of tests and other things that help them do that, like blood tests today certainly, I would assume, are more productive than whatever they had 100 years ago. Maybe you can test for more things. So saying that they aren't advancing at all is also I think, issue that I have with this argument that they're making, which is they must be getting more productive. I think the arts were potentially a more interesting case where if you want to see a live show, which I've actually tried looking into prices and they're like outrageously expensive. And that makes sense to me because you can only have so many people physically in the theater to watch this show. You have to pay those people enough so that they can live and thrive off of this. There's maybe many people in that show, as they mentioned, like the Shakespeare play. Like, you can't just start removing characters wantonly and still have a good story to it. And so that one was a little bit more interesting to me, but also I think like Hamilton exists as an example. They recorded that and then put it online. And so that's another way that they became more productive, which is they took a musical that you would usually have to go in person for, and then they allowed that to be streamed someplace else and get a lot more productivity out of them. And that was enabled through technology. And so, again, I think those are the two key things. It's unclear how much these individual people's salaries are changing over time. And to this other argument of, I'm not sure they're completely stagnant in their productivity. I think there could be an argument made of, due to inherently how they function, they're going to increase in productivity at a slower rate than other sectors. And that I could believe. And that would increase the gap after a certain amount of time. So again, I feel like it's a little loose right now. I think they have some decent arguments here, but I don't know if I'm completely convinced.
Reduce the number of doctors and nurses needed at a hospital, and our streets could be patrolled by an army of robot peacekeepers. What could go wrong?
I don't know if there's an audience for an all-Android production of Julius Caesar, but at least the tickets would be cheap.
And that's our 2 cents.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit like or subscribe. I'll see you around.